This is the Wisdom Podcast.
Welcome to the Wisdom Podcast. For this episode, I travelled to Washington State to Sravasti Abbey. We were there filming a course with Venerable Chodron, who was teaching on the book Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, which she co-authored with the Dalai Lama. You'll be hearing lots more about wisdom courses in the future, so stay tuned. While I was at the Abbey, I took the opportunity to record this episode with Venerable Chodron, in which he talks about the book and why the Dalai Lama thought it was an important project to work on. We also hear a little bit about Venerable Chodron's own journey. And so here is Venerable Chodron. It was in the 70s. You attended a meditation course with Lama Yeshe.
Yes.
And I was wondering, was that your first introduction to Buddhism?
Basically, yes. I had been in Nepal and India in 72, 73, and saw some Buddhist things. In fact, the furthest point in my journey was the village where Lama Zopa was born. Oh, but of course, I didn't know him or anything. No, in Tami.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's across the hill from Laodao. So, I like the Buddhist art and things, but I really didn't know much about it. So I went back to the States. I was in graduate school in education and also teaching. And then it was summer vacation, so nothing to do. I saw a sign about a Buddhist meditation course. Mm-hmm. So I signed up. Yeah, it was a 3-week course. I signed up for 2 weeks. Yeah.
Test the waters.
Right. So I didn't know, when I went, I didn't know anything about Buddhism, zero. I didn't know the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism. Yes. I didn't know the different types of Buddhism, zero. Okay. Wow. I walked into the course, this was 1975, with my long hair down to my waist and my embroidered in peasant blouse and very colorful Indian skirt. Had just gotten my ears pierced, so I had big earrings. Walked into this course. And as usual, the lamas were late. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. And so there's a man in a skirt and a woman with a shaved head, with Thubten Chodron and Nick Reibush.
Oh, okay.
And they say, let's meditate until the lamas come. So I didn't know what that meant. So I sat down. I rolled my eyes back in my head because I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing, even though I didn't know what I was doing. And fortunately, the lamas came soon, so I didn't get too bad of a headache from doing something stupid like that. But the course was really profound for me. One of the first things was Lama said, you don't need to believe anything we tell you. Yeah.
It's liberating.
And yes, very liberating. And it left me to listen. Yeah. And he said, you're all intelligent people. So, you think about what you hear. You test it out by reasoning. You try it out. You see if it works. Yeah. If it doesn't work, leave it. Yeah. So I really like that approach very much. Yeah. So I listened. And I had before that all sorts of spiritual questions. Mm-hmm. And what I found, much to my surprise, was that Buddhism gave very reasonable answers to my questions. I had gone before to other religions and to check them out, and the answers just didn't make it for me.
What were some of those questions? Do you remember?
Why am I alive?
Why am I alive?
Yeah. What's the purpose of my life?
These are the questions that took you to Newport, or was Newport an adventure?
That was more an adventure because I spent, after college and working a year, I spent a year and a half just traveling because I wanted to really experience the world. So that was part of the adventure going there.
So you had these like existential questions and you hadn't found any reasonable answers.
Yeah.
And then someone says, look, I have some answers. You don't have to believe them. You're an intelligent person. Check them out for yourself. And they actually made sense to you. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. You know, that's what was so surprising, you know, because the whole idea of rebirth, you know, when I thought about it, oh, that makes some sense.
Yeah.
And karma, because I was always wondered why, as a kid, why was I born me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wondered why was I born
me?
Yeah.
As me.
Yeah, why was I born
Like
me
this.
in this family, in this country, as this person? Why wasn't I born as somebody else?
And so there's probably people listening to us who have those exact questions and they're searching for these reasonable answers. So what was said, like in terms of like the questions about rebirth, what was it that made sense to you?
First of all, that there was a continuity of consciousness that, to me, the way they explained it was very logical and a scientific way of explaining it. You know, that everything arises from causes. And if there's a cause, there's, you know, in the conditions, there's going to be a result. So, you know, consciousness had to have a cause that was similar in nature to it. So previous life. You know, and also as a kid, I never believed I was my body.
Yes.
Yeah. So the idea, death, okay, that consciousness and body go in different directions.
Yeah. Made sense to you.
That made
intuitively.
sense to me. And then when you bring karma in there, you know, that there's an ethical dimension to our actions, that what we do influences what we experience and what we become. That really made sense.
Yeah. So you had already figured out that for you, your mind was something different to your body.
Yeah.
And then when they explained, when, you know, the question arrived, well, anything that is there has to have a cause. So you were thinking like the first moment of your mind in this life must have had a cause.
Right.
What could have that been?
Right.
And they were saying, well, it must have been something similar in nature.
Right.
Right. And then on top of that, so that answers the, you know, the before and after type questions. But then the question around, well, why is it like this now?
Yeah.
That's where karma came in.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then the whole thing of what's the purpose of my life. I always knew it had something to do with benefiting others. I didn't know what. I mean, that's why I had gone into education. But when I heard about bodhicitta, it was like, that's it.
Can you explain bodhicitta, what that word means?
Okay. Well, the definition, is the intention to become a fully awakened Buddha in order to benefit living beings, sentient beings, most effectively. Yeah. And so that idea that we have amazing human potential that we only are using a part of, you know, and that we have the potential to have a mind that's impartial and can care about others deeply in an impartial way, that it's possible to have compassion that extends to everybody, you know, that it's possible to develop these wonderful qualities of a Buddha, and that beings have already done it, then it's like, wow, well, that's a much better purpose in life than, you know, growing up, getting married, having my 2.5 children, climbing up the corporate scale, having my social life, getting old and dying.
Yes.
You know, which never was totally appealing to me.
It doesn't sound appealing when you say it like that.
Yeah, well, it is. That is it. Yeah.
And so another thing I noticed about shortly after that, maybe 2 years after that, you became ordained.
Yeah.
So that's quite quick, maybe. But if you've come to that place so soon, then it makes a lot of sense. And so I was wondering, that decision is a lifelong decision.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big decision.
Yeah.
So how did that come about for you?
Well, what's strange is within a few months of having met the Dharma, I knew I wanted to ordain.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, if the me now could meet the person who I was then, I probably would have thought, this kid's too much,
Yes.
But, there was just a passion there. I requested Lama for ordination. He wisely told me, wait a while.
That was Lama Yeshe?
Yes.
What were your impressions of Lama Yeshe? When you first walked into that meditation hall? I'm just going to digress a little bit to capture that.
Yeah. Lama glowed.
Wow.
There was a glowing quality about Lama. There was also, I think his talent was how he made us laugh at ourselves. He could talk so frankly about all of our stupidagios and make us laugh at ourselves. And that was a great gift. He also could be very,
Very forceful.
Forceful, yeah. Wrathful.
Wrathful, okay.
Yeah.
We're going wrath.
Yeah. I remember a couple of times at Kopan, because I lived at Kopan for some time, where Lama really, it's like, this has got to stop, And, yeah. But he also had a way of giving you the feeling that it was possible. He always talked about our poor quality view, how we don't believe in ourselves, how we put ourselves down unnecessarily. And then he would talk about the potential of human beings in a way that you really felt like, yeah, maybe that's possible.
Inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rinpoche at that time was quite young.
Yes.
He was very serious.
Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Yeah, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, his head down, very serious, telling you about the hell realms. And but mostly about the 8 worldly concerns.
Yes.
Again and again and again, the 8 worldly concerns. And a few years ago, I went up when I saw Rinpoche and I thanked him. And I said, thank you so much for emphasizing the 8 worldly concerns and the suffering of samsara so much again and again to us. Because that really sets a good foundation for practice. And I'm finding now more that teachers don't necessarily do that.
Yes.
The students now want to hear about light and love and bliss.
Yeah.
And so the teachers don't always teach.
Bring the reality.
Yeah. They don't teach that way so much. But Rinpoche did, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yes.
Extremely grateful. Because he was really clear, what's the demarcation between a Dharma action and a non-Dharma action, the presence or absence of the 8 worldly concerns, whether your motivation is only for the happiness of this life. Whoa, So it made it so that you can't be a hypocrite.
Yeah, and the 8 worldly concerns, for our audience, they are...
They are. Okay,
Right,
so they're in
right.
4 pairs.
Yeah.
And they're actually what we spend most of our life focused on.
Yes. It's
So,
what we do as samsaric beings.
yes. So having delight in getting possessions and money and being displeased when we don't get them or we lose them or other people have more and better than we do. Having... this is a big one for people, me too, is we want praise and approval. Yeah. We don't want criticism and blame. Okay. Then having delight at a good reputation and a lot of aversion to a bad one. and then attachment to the pleasures of the senses, and aversion to unpleasant things. Yeah. And when I looked at my mind, these 8 were what occupied my mind all day and all night.
Yeah. They drive us from A to B.
Yeah.
To C. Yeah. And so living your life, so Lama Zopa Rinpoche was saying the difference between living a dharmic life and living a samsaric life is whether you're motivated by these 8 thoughts.
Yeah.
And so having a different type of motivation might be like the bodhicitta motivation.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it gave me, some way to transform my mind and to change my motivation and to have a purpose in my life that had never even been presented to me before.
Your life became meaningful.
Definitely. Because that was my whole question before. What was the meaning of life? I looked around me in the world and what people were doing at the end of the day, when you die, I didn't see much purpose in a lot of what people were doing.
Yes. And so then you went to Lama Yeshe. You spoke about wanting to be ordained. And he, what did he say?
Yeah, he said, "Oh, yes, dear," because, he called everybody dear. But wait a while. And of course, I didn't want to wait a while. But, you follow your teacher's instructions. So I did. And his instructions were actually quite good because, I had to come back to the States, clean up some things, and then go back to India to be ordained. Yeah.
And you were ordained by
Khyentse Ling Rinpoche.
Oh, wonderful. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama's senior teacher.
Right.
And so you went to Dharamsala and you had a relationship with Ling Rinpoche, or this was...
the ordination was one of the first times I met him.
Wow.
Lama and Rinpoche had arranged the ordination. But after that, since he was my preceptor, then I developed a relationship with him.
And what was Ling Rinpoche like?
Oh, he was great. He was big and, and just very still. Yeah, very, very still, very calm. In spite of, being this manifestation of Yamantaka, who's so fierce.
Yeah, Jikje, yeah.
But it really showed me that, okay, in the middle of all hell breaking loose, you can be still and calm.
Great teaching.
And years later, I received Yamantaka initiation from him. And when he was giving the teachings, it was like he was just describing what's in the room. The way I would say, oh, there's a bookshelf, and there's Daniel, and there's Jason, and there's Venerable Dhamma. He was saying, oh, here the East Quadrant is this color, the West Quadrant is that color, and you're holding this and that and doing this and that.
It was so present in the mandala.
Yeah,
it was like...
he was completely in the mandala, just telling you what it looks like.
Wow.
Yeah?
That is the quality of a master,
Yeah.
a true master.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. And at the same time, incredibly humble. Very humble, very unassuming. So I feel very fortunate because I came along at the time when Ling Rinpoche, Chichen Rinpoche, Song Rinpoche, Serkum Rinpoche, some of these great masters, Geshe Noen Dargay, when they were still all alive. And within 5-7 years after I came along, they were gone. So I feel very fortunate in that way.
Yeah, that was an amazing time.
Yeah.
To be around those great masters.
Yeah.
And they were coming to the States, or were you going to India?
Well, I spent a lot of time in India and Nepal. And then when Lama sent me to live in Italy and later in France, then some of those teachers also came there.
Came and visited.
Yeah.
Wow. So fantastic. I wanted to ask about, So your decision to become ordained was really driven by a renunciation, we could probably call it, like a looking at this life and saying, I'm not finding meaningfulness within the usual path. And then you saw, and then you met these teachers, and you found a way of living meaningful that was about benefiting others, right? And that sort of inspired your ordination. Is that right?
Yeah.
So then I was wondering, so there's probably people listening that are thinking about, you know, becoming a monk or a nun, and I was wondering if you had any advice for them, or what are the good reasons to become ordained in America in 2015, you know? And has it changed since 1970s, or it's the same thing since the Buddha asked people to follow him?
Yeah, well, I think it's the same since the Buddhist time in terms of your motivation.
Yes.
The circumstances are a little bit different, but in terms of your motivation and trying to live a simple life and keep precepts, you know, that's pretty much the same.
Yes.
So I think the motivation is the key thing. You know, and to really, if somebody is, you know, has that kind of inspiration, to really spend some time meditating on the disadvantages of the 8 worldly concerns, meditating on the first 2 of the 4 Noble Truths, you know, to really see the nature of samsara, to understand the afflictions that cause it. Yeah. And then, of course, the last 2 of the 4 truths, the cessation and the path, so you see there's a way out. Because I think it's very important to have a Buddhist worldview before you ordain. You know, ordaining isn't about sitting in the front of the row,
For sure.
The front of the audience. It's not about wearing some cool clothes. It's not about looking holy or gaining some status. It's about transforming your mind.
So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because even in India today, if you get ordained in India, you disappear into a monastery. So in terms of you become
Not the
one
Westerners.
What's that?
Not the Westerners.
Well, let's talk about the
the
set
Tibetans.
this up.
Okay.
So the way in Tibet, so when you talk about Tibet, when you're ordained, you put on the robes, and ordination came with being in a monastery or another.
Yeah.
And it meant becoming one of many.
Right.
And I see in the West, or maybe you might make the argument in India even today, when Westerners become ordained, those things don't go hand in hand. And instead of become one of many, you stand out rather than blend in. And there's no monastic institution to be within.
Right. And this is a big problem.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about
It's
that a
big
little
problem.
bit.
I mean, this is the reason for starting Sravasti Abbey.
Yeah, okay.
Is because the situation I was ordained in is, you know, the Tibetans were a refugee population. Their concern was their own monks and nuns. Yeah, they couldn't support us financially. We could stay at Kopan for a while, but the Nepali government would kick us out when our visas, you know, were gone. We couldn't really stay in the Tibetan monasteries because they spoke Tibetan, and, you know, the culture was very different. So you were kind of thrust out on your own and expected to keep your precepts and also somehow feed yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, which was very, very difficult, you know. And in the early years of my ordained life, I was very, very poor. You know, it was really hard. And I was in India at that time, but also when I came back to the West. You know, nobody was going to support monks and nuns. I was kind of you know, I stayed in Dharma centers, but, you know, Dharma centers are for lay people mostly.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was very difficult. And then some years also spent living on my own, and, you know. So one of the reasons for starting the Abbey is, you know, the Buddha set up the Sangha. He didn't ordain people and want you to be an individual doing your own trip.
Yep.
He wanted you to live together and support each other and contribute to the welfare of the group and use the energy of the group to keep you going in a good direction.
Yeah. That and when I come to here, I get a sense of that. So like I've spent time in nunneries in Tibet and have a feeling for that, and monasteries, that culture. It's almost like a culture. And then I know here in America we have wonderful Dharma centers and wonderful even retreat spaces, but it's different. And so then to come here and see a group of monastics living together, eating together, meditating together, you know, all that then I'm like, oh, this is a nunnery.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing place you've created here.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see that.
Thank you.
Is this unique in America?
I think so.
Wow.
I haven't come across many others, which is probably why this one was begun, because I couldn't find any place else.
No choice but to start your own.
Yeah.
That's what pioneering is all about, isn't it?
Right.
And so you also hosted a conference here just recently,
Yeah.
so which is relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, we had a Western Buddhist monastics gathering. Actually, we call it a gathering, not a conference.
Oh, okay.
Because we don't present papers.
Yes.
We aren't trying to impress each other.
Yes.
We're just meeting together as friends. Yeah. And so we've been doing this. This was the 21st one. So it's been happening for over 2 decades now.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Yeah. And so having Western monastics and Asian monastics who live in the West
Yes.
from all different traditions come together and get to know each other as friends and share our experiences as monastics. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And you see all these different color robes.
Yes.
Yeah. And all these different personalities and all these different ways of living a monastic life. But our minds, have, we really understand each other. Yeah.
You're living the same life.
Yeah. We're living the same life in slightly different ways according to our
different
tradition.
vows,
Yeah. But, the precepts are the same. The goal is the same. So we really understand each other on a deep level. Yeah.
And facing the same challenges, I
Yes.
imagine. So what are some of those
Yes.
challenges?
Well, you have a few
leading
days.
question, if ever there was one.
Okay. Well, one of the challenges is financial support.
Yes.
Yeah. But, I think part of the reason that some Westerners have problem with that is that they don't want to live in a community. They want to live on their own. If you live on your own, and especially if you're working a job, there's no reason for other people to support you.
Yes.
Yeah, you really have to give up doing your own trip,
Yes.
which is very hard. We're Westerners, especially Americans.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. But that's the only way to build a community. And having community is the only way, really, for lay people to see the value of supporting monastics.
Yes.
When I lived in India, of course, you had the problems there, the visa problems, health problems. Everybody got sick. Okay.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, I had Hep A when I was there, and everybody had dysentery at one time or another. And, and then we got kicked out of the countries because of, our visas were over and trying to figure out where to go. And then the whole translation thing.
Yes.
Yeah. When you began to study with other teachers and they didn't speak English. And you had a translation, and then in those days there weren't so many good translators. Now it's much better, yeah. But still, it's via a translation, and then also, being a Westerner, like you said, you stand out. So then you have your family kind of saying, "What in the world are you doing?" Yeah. what do I tell my friends that my daughter or my son is doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hard question to answer, right?
Yeah, for parents, it's
For sure.
difficult.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's like quite a few people being ordained, but no place for them to go.
Yep.
Other than India, which is the conditions aren't helpful.
Right.
Dharma centers it's not a monastery.
Right.
And there's no support there.
Yeah.
So as part of the Dharma coming to places like America, and the Sangha being supported, it sort of doesn't make sense to do it without, like an abbey, a monastery, a nunnery.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
because also when you have a monastic community, then there's a place, and people know if I want the Dharma, I can go there. And
Yes.
they think of the monastics and they think, okay, I'm running around all day, but these people are meditating on loving kindness.
Yeah.
And I can go anytime I want
Yeah.
and join them.
Yeah, and I think that also there's a difference, right, between supporting like a monastery and supporting a person.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so for Westerners, it's hard to wrap their head around. I'll go to a center and there's some ordained Sangha there, and it's a Dharma center, and then that person needs support, right? And so then it's a different thing to support that. And then you think, well, I want to go do a 3-month retreat, and I need money to do that. And why does? But and then it's so I've heard people talk like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's a different thing to support an institution.
Yeah.
Like a monastery or a nunnery.
Right. Right.
And I think that's easier for Americans to wrap their head around.
Yeah. And also because as an institution, we don't charge people.
Yes.
We do everything on the dana basis.
Yeah.
So that makes a huge difference.
And that's the traditional supported
Yes.
that was in India, that was set up in Buddhist monasteries since the Buddha. So that makes sense that that's the way to do it in America in 2015.
Yeah. But people look and say, you're crazy.
Yeah.
How come you can hold all these things and not charge people? Because every Dharma center almost charges people.
For sure.
Yeah. And especially because we have people stay overnight, we don't charge them. We do it completely on donation basis. And also, we only eat the food that people bring to us, that they offer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
you are reliant upon the community.
yes. Yes.
And it's working.
And it's working. And when I
Fantastic.
started, people said, you're crazy. You're going to starve. The Abbey's way out in the middle of nowhere. You're going to starve.
Yeah.
But, we let people know. And when people come to join things, they bring food. And some people, they donate food every week. So
Yeah,
it
this is
works.
amazing. Like really, that this is working in America now. That's great. I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm not sure if you heard our episode with His Holiness the Karmapa, and His Holiness talked a little bit about his plan for the full ordination of women in the Tibetan tradition. And I know you've been quite involved, and I was wondering. I just wanted you to speak a little bit on that issue.
Okay. Yeah, so it is something close to my heart because personally speaking, I think my becoming a monastic was the best thing I ever did in my life. And so I want other people to have that opportunity. And especially when I was able to take the full ordination and become a bhikshuni, that radically changed my Dharma practice. Yeah. And so while many of the Tibetan lamas, because the full ordination lineage for nuns doesn't exist in the Tibetan community, they'll tell you, oh, it's not important, it doesn't matter, you have bodhisattva and tantric vows anyway. Actually, like I said, my experience was it completely changed my Dharma practice. Because when I became a nun and took that ceremony, it was so you really felt like, wow, this has been going on from the time of the Buddha from teacher to disciple to teacher to disciple
Yeah.
for 26 centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all these people practiced, they all kept the monastic life through thick or thin. And a lot of it was thin if you look historically. But they adhered to the lifestyle and the precepts. And because of what they did and their sacrifice, I, as some silly little person, was allowed to come in and receive this ordination. And like, how amazingly fortunate I am. So I can't just now take it for granted.
Yes.
You know, I've received this, so now I have to sustain it. I have to preserve it. In other words, I have to grow up.
Yeah.
So as a Dharma practitioner, instead of just, I don't have this, and this circumstance isn't right, and this problem and that problem, now I have to be somebody who preserves the tradition and make it possible for other people to ordain. And like I said, that just made me grow up tremendously.
And how do you do that? But do you support, well, first question is, when you went and got the full ordination, was that supported by your teachers? Is it maybe a tricky question and we can...
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. So I was a novice for nine and a half years before I took Bhikshuni ordination. When I wanted to take it, I asked His Holiness.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew he supported it. So there was a situation in those days where, people in the community could just go offer to katas to His Holiness, one right after the other. So I did that. When it was my time, I said, I request your permission to take Bhikshuni ordination. And he said, yes, of course, I'll pray.
Wow, what a beautiful moment.
Yeah. And that's all
That's
I
all you
needed.
Yes. Fantastic.
Yeah.
What a special time and what a blessing.
Yeah, it was incredible. 5 words, that was it.
Nice.
But so then I went to Taiwan. This was in 1986, and I received the ordination there.
And then as taking on the responsibility to help other people do likewise, what does that look like for you?
Well, first, trying to keep your precepts as best as you can. Trying to learn the Vinaya as best as you can, even when there aren't so many books in English. Helping, now we're translating some of the ceremonies.
Great.
And some of the texts explaining the Vinaya. And, being a monastic, just who you are, I think can show people the value of that lifestyle, and the joy that comes from being a monastic. And then here at the Abbey, for the novice ordination for the women, and the training ordination, the Shramanarika and Shikshamana ordination, we give them here at the Abbey.
Okay.
Yeah, my Chinese preceptor, told me to do that.
Okay.
So I do that. For full ordination, the women go to Taiwan.
Yes.
We have, right now 1 man. We hope to get some more men.
Yeah.
So for the novice ordination and for the full ordination, they go to the Chinese tradition.
Great.
But my dream is to someday have enough Western English-speaking bhikshus and bhikshunis who have been ordained long enough, who can give the full ordination in English.
Yes.
Here.
That will certainly be a turning point in the Dharma in the West.
Yes.
And great vision. Wow.
Yeah.
Really nice to hear. I didn't know that was the plan. A fantastic vision.
Yeah, that's what I would really like to see happen.
Also I'm thinking about, in terms of taking on responsibility, you also are a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And travel the world teaching Dharma.
Yeah.
Teach here. And we had the fortune of hearing a little Dharma talk by Venerable
Chuni.
Venerable Chodron here. And Venerable was quoting from Tsongkhapa, Pabanka Rinpoche, and then her own teacher. So I thought that was really nice, and sitting there, and I feel like, oh yeah, Dharma is arriving here. Really got a great foothold. And so I wanted your thoughts on how Western Buddhist teachers, how it's going, and what students should look for. And I know also you've been involved with in the early days when the Dalai Lama was having conferences around the Western Buddhist teachers, and you guys, everyone was trying to figure out, well, what does a Western Buddhist teacher look like?
Yeah.
And that's also an important transition for the Dharma to the West.
Yeah.
I guess that's a long question. But
Oh, it's a long question. It's a big question. And I might step on some toes answering it.
please, please.
Because it's something that really concerns me.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I've been to some of the Western Buddhist teachers' conferences, where you have lay teachers and just a few monastics. And I was surprised at one I went to a few years ago. They did an exercise where they were asking us different questions, and half of the teachers there did not believe in rebirth.
Yes. Was this a Western Buddhist teachers for what tradition?
It was everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. And so was it particular traditions that were, like, could you isolate that? I'm wondering, like, because as the Dharmas come to the West, there's certain traditions that are more easygoing with doctrines, shall we say?
I wouldn't call it easygoing.
Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, one of the things I saw at that conference, before I answer your question directly, was that it seemed that the only qualifications you needed in the West to be a Buddhist teacher was to be able to teach mindfulness meditation and breathing meditation.
Yeah.
And it was like,
Yeah.
There was no discussion at the conference of what are your responsibilities as a teacher.
But also, if you're only teaching mindfulness, what is it distinctly Buddhist that you are teaching to call yourself a Buddhist teacher?
And why are you calling yourself a Buddhist teacher?
Exactly.
Yeah. And, so Buddhism's come to the West in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And this was really apparent at the conference because we had people from Vipassana, from Zen, Tibetans, everybody there. And for me, because I grew up in the Buddhist community in a very, I grew up in Asia as a Buddhist.
Yes.
I was in my 20s, but
as a Buddhist.
My baby Buddhist years were spent in Asia around really amazing masters. And, and I really had, my worldview was the Buddhist worldview.
Yeah.
So that includes rebirth. It includes karma. It includes the possibility of becoming enlightened. It includes the idea of taking refuge in the three jewels.
Yeah.
Some of the traditions that have come here to the West, they've extracted a meditation technique from the Buddhist teachings that it was embedded in Asia, and just taught that technique.
Yeah.
And so they've left behind the whole Buddhist worldview within which these teachings have a particular meaning and lead to a particular goal. Yeah. And they've brought them to the West, and now the goal seems different.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm not criticizing in the sense that using Buddhist, mindfulness and Vipassana and so on, meditation techniques to help people have a better life, this life, is very good. Yeah. I think that's really wonderful. Yeah. My qualm is if people start thinking that's all Buddhism is.
Yes.
And that Buddhism loses the liberating teachings that can lead you to nirvana and full awakening. Because now everybody's just kind of doing,
Shamatha,
mindfulness, something, watching your mind. And the way they're teaching mindfulness is also different than how the Buddha taught mindfulness. Yeah. So my concern is that all this leads to the liberating teachings of the Buddha getting lost.
Yes.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
In terms of these things helping other people,
fantastic. In terms of them being Buddhist, distinctly Buddhist, I think I don't think you can make that argument.
No.
And we even know from the Buddha's life. He studied with teachers who taught him meditation.
Yeah.
He tried, and he came to a point where that was not enough. This we can call it mindfulness or concentration meditation. And so we know that even the Buddha thought that was not enough. And then we know from Lam Rim, the minimum requirements for something being a Buddhist practice has to do with a certain motivation that looks beyond this life.
Yep.
So, nicely said, actually. I think I think that discussion needs to happen.
Yeah.
And so is that what's being talked about at these conferences? Does that come up?
Well, I didn't go to the most recent conference because of Western Buddhist teachers, because it overlapped with His Holiness's teachings. But it does come up in these Western Buddhist monastic gatherings, because all of the monastics from all of the traditions, we're all very unified in being concerned about this. Yeah, because we all grew up in a more traditional approach that really makes sense. And we're all interested in liberation and awakening.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. But finding the correct format to talk about this is not always so easy, because some people get offended. There's many people who, if you bring this up, they say, well, you're just too traditional, or, oh, you're from a patriarchal tradition. We want to be more egalitarian, or monasticism. Oh, you're saying that because you're a monastic. And monasticism is old-fashioned, know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've heard many people, they say, oh, you're just escaping your sexual desire and suppressing it to become a monastic, and you belong to this hierarchical, patriarchal tradition that is totally outmoded. And I've heard some people teaching Buddhism say this.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa. I mean, it's like they've forgotten that our teacher, the Buddha, was a monastic.
Yes.
And that the Buddha himself had the Buddhist worldview.
Yeah, for sure. But also it comes down to a definition of the third noble truth, really.
Yeah.
Like, what is cessation? And that's what it really gets to the heart of the matter. Like, how do you define that goal?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Actually, it involves all four noble truths.
Yeah.
Because how you define that goal is going to have a lot to do with how you define dukkha.
Yeah.
To start with. Yeah.
And so the definition of dukkha, a definition of dukkha that doesn't involve the three types of suffering is going to change the definition of cessation, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's going to change the definition of the cause.
Oh, for sure.
The path.
Exactly.
The whole thing.
They're all interrelated, as we know.
Yeah, the whole thing stops.
So then you change the Four Noble Truths and you're talking about a different Dharma.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm just running the arguments with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have somebody who understands the argument.
Well, so then the role of the Western Buddhist teacher then, when someone says that you're too traditional, I hear you're too authentic. Do you know what I mean? And you can't be too authentic, right? So how the Western Buddhist teachers teaching authentic Dharma.
Yeah.
And how do you think do you think we're doing a good job in the West, or
in some quarters I think an excellent job. In some quarters I have a lot of concern. Yeah.
What about lineage? as well. So in the Tibetan tradition, lineage is very important.
Yeah.
And I think in all traditions, lineage is very important. But maybe that's stretching.
Yeah, lineage. Lineage is important in the sense of knowing that what you're learning and what you're practicing comes from the Buddha. Lineage is not important in terms of this is my football team.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm going to root for it because it's the best football team.
That's sectarianism.
That's sectarian. Yeah. But to appreciate your lineage and to appreciate the Buddha who taught what has become multiple lineages, which is what the book is about. You know, that is one thing, you know. Rooting for my football team and criticizing other ones, which unfortunately goes on too much, is not the meaning of lineage.
So let's talk about your because this gets right to your book that you co-authored with the Dalai Lama called Buddhism: One Teacher, Many Traditions. And so what was actually the idea behind this book and how did it come about? Because I think it relates to what we've just been talking about. Okay.
Well, actually, the book started out not as that book per se. I had gone to His Holiness in the 90s and requested him please to write a short text that Geshis could use when they teach Dharma in the West that is meant for Westerners who did not grow up in a Buddhist culture and do not, cannot start off with relying on a spiritual master and precious human life because we don't even have the basic Buddhist worldview that those meditations rely on. So His Holiness said, yes, but first we should do something larger. So he gave me a manuscript and he sent me off, not a manuscript, a transcript, and sent me off and told me to write something. And so going to his teachings and everything, I started to write a book, which I thought would include I talked to a lot of Westerners and, what do you think we need to learn about first before we really delve into Tibetan Buddhism? Yes. So I started writing that, and then I would go back to see His Holiness every few years to, let him know how it was going. And at one point he said, this book has to be unique. It has to have information about the other Buddhist traditions. We already have Lamrim. This one has to have things about other traditions. So I didn't know exactly what he meant, but, I went to Thailand, I went to Taiwan, I did a lot of research about other traditions, which really enhanced my own Dharma practice, and then started putting that in the manuscript. And it wasn't actually until maybe 2012, that during a series of interviews with His Holiness, that it became clear to me that he also wanted a book that was just about the different Buddhist traditions, because he said that he has more contact with Christians and Muslims and Hindus than he does with other Buddhists. And he said it shouldn't be like this, because throughout Buddhist history, people were so separated geographically. And then, of course, you get all these wrong views about other traditions being passed down from generation to generation. And because they lived in different places and spoke different languages, there was nobody to correct these wrong views. So His Holiness felt it was very important to write something so that all the Buddhist traditions knew something about each other.
Yeah, so His Holiness actually felt like he had more contact with other religions than within different Buddhist traditions.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said it shouldn't be like this.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And so
So then what I do is I went back to that manuscript, which by that time was over 2,000 pages. Single-spaced, 11 font.
My gosh.
8.5 by 11.
That's some manuscript.
And I extracted, some of the primary points and fashioned it into that book.
Buddhism.
Yeah.
And so people, so the idea is that anyone from any Buddhist tradition can pick up this book and then learn a little bit about how the other traditions are similar, and also in how they are different in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because His Holiness says in seeing our similarities, we shouldn't whitewash the differences.
Yes.
The differences are there. We can acknowledge them. But diversity doesn't need to be a cause for disharmony.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things one feedback I got that really pleased me about the book is one of my friends who's a Theravada monk said, I learned a lot about my own tradition from reading that book.
Great.
And I thought,
Then you're on the right track when you get that feedback, for sure.
Yeah.
And so now we're sort of talking about making a course, and I think it would be a wonderful course for that very reason.
Yes.
And so as part of that, we're here to record your retreat, and you're doing a retreat on based on the book.
Course.
A course. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about the course. Like what can someone expect from who, if someone was coming, one of our listeners was here, what would they experience?
Okay. Well, I can give you some idea, but I've got to tell you that I tend to flow with what is happening at the moment. So I did not plan out a curriculum. On day 1 we do this, on day 2 we do this, because I know I won't stick with it.
Yes.
So my plan is to, I want the people to read the book before, or read each chapter before we go through it. But then I'll read it and stop and make commentary about different parts of it. Because this last summer we had a retreat on exploring monastic life. We have it every year for monastic wannabes and the newly
monastic wannabes
and the newly ordained.
The newly ordained. Great. Sounds like a book in that, monastic wannabes and the newly ordained. Great title.
It is. So at that time, I took the chapter on ethical conduct out of the book, and I read it and stopped and made a lot of commentary about it and how it relates to us and all these kinds of things. So that's what I intend to do for the whole book. I don't know how far I'll get.
Yes.
So if we don't finish,
we'll be back.
Yeah, you'll be back for longer.
Longer next time, definitely. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, so thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'm sure everyone's going to love your insights into Buddhism and Buddhism in the West, monasticism, Western teachers. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
So that's Venerable Chodron. I hope you enjoyed the interview. More information about wisdom courses will be coming soon. And if you're interested in the book Venerable Chodron co-authored with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, you can find it at wisdompubs.org. That's wisdompubs.org. On our next episode, we are joined by one of the world's top Buddhist scholars, Jeffrey Hopkins, Professor Emeritus of the University of Virginia.
It's like, and it's stayed with me. And when you leave your job, however nice a job it is, you just walk out and the water fills in. It's like pulling your hand out of a bucket. You're gone. And it served me well. You leave the university and that's a nice way to leave.